So Jim Richard, with Richard and Bauer, is from Phoenix, Arizona, and he is the architectural design principal. It's a studio-based architecture interior practicing. Their focus is on higher education, research, public and academic library design. The firm was founded in 1996 by James Richard and Kelly Bauer. He was educated at the University of Arizona College of Architecture from 1980 to 1985 as a designer with a large A&E firm in Tucson Sonoran Desert. He developed a specialty sensitive to context of the region and environment. Formative years within large firm enforced the idea that the largest of projects were executed by a small group of very dedicated people with a common vision. To that end, the firm remains an intimate scale of 10 highly skilled and motivated people. Over its 10-year history, the firm has garnered over 50 local, regional, national, and international design awards. The firm was recognized as an emerging voice in 2001 from the Architectural League of New York, and one of the new Vanguard by Architectural Record in 2002, mostly recently Designer of the Year by Contract Magazine in 2007. And with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Jim.
Thank you. This is really a terrific little get-together. Thank you for having us. We're excited about being here and honored, actually, to be asked to come. I know we've come back to the city many times and visited with Eric, and it's always great to come back here and see what's occurring. As mentioned, we're a desert firm out of Phoenix, Arizona. I think a lot of the similarities of what we've done over time in Phoenix and along with the sister city of Las Vegas, and a lot of the things that go back and forth between these two cities, there's some real interesting parallels. And I see, I was just mentioning to a number of the students today that some time ago when I first went to Phoenix, Arizona, it was hard to believe, but we actually had an architectural wasteland in Phoenix. About 1990, there really wasn't much going on in Phoenix at all as far as architecture was concerned. And the renaissance of work that's happened since about that period in time, and to see where you all are in this really interesting pivotal moment, I think, to begin to really explore architecture in Las Vegas, I think is a really exciting time. It reminds me a lot of what was going on in Phoenix earlier in my career. A little bit about us. We are what I would call regional modernists. Fundamentally, the work that we do is really driven by a response to context and to the environmental requirements of a particular project. Out of that response, we try to develop a very systematized approach to our work, but at the same time try to develop a poetry behind each project. Obviously, where we work influences what we do. Within the Desert Southwest, there's such just amazing landforms and context. I often say that, you know, a wainscot or a finial gets lost within the context of this kind of an environment. So the bigger, bolder moves to architecture are what have always excited us in developing our work. We look to nature, not only in terms of the context that we build in, but also the systems of nature and the way nature has adapted the landscape to respond to the harsh environment that we live in. We also look back on the notion of craft and how people have built over time to respond to the context that we live in. So, for instance, the Casa Bonito on the left with the amazing work that has stood there for, you know, over 1,200 years, the craftsmanship that goes into this assembly here. But not only that, it's also the idea that the idea of craft has sort of disappeared in a lot of the work. The construction techniques that are used these days, and the fact that we can simply come in and renew a building by painting it or covering it back over with another surface sort of erases this idea of time on our work. And so developing works that have a patina and they develop a sense of time in them was really important to what we've taken away from our context. This is an example of what I kind of referred to as the cowboy simplicity of the Southwest, that the simple and easy and earnest answer to how things are assembled and how they're put together. So really understanding how we build, how we assemble these things, how materials react to one another, and what's the ultimate outcome. The streak of the rust along the nail head that comes off of this 200-year-old mining shack, or the real simplicity of how you make these assemblies that contain space, and early notions about architecture. And then, of course, all the systems that have been added to the architecture that we build, the mechanical, electrical, all the things that we deal with that become actual elements in the ultimate design are very important to us. I went back and I pulled a number of projects that sort of show development of our firm over time. This is one of our very early projects, which had to do with developing a small branch library. As mentioned, we do a lot of public work, so a lot of these projects are actually library projects. So I thought it'd be interesting to show you how these projects have evolved, being that most of them are public libraries. So down in Tucson, Arizona, we were asked to do a project which was about a 10,000 square foot library that was along a major roadway on the southwest side of town. The library actually sits right here. And it's on a site for the community park, community center. And adjacent to us here was basically the community. And it was obviously getting the kids on their bikes from the community to the community center was a major issue. So the whole idea was to create a bridge along this alignment. So what we developed was an idea of a building that was a bridge and that would connect both sides of the street. And actually bringing people across the roadway was a celebratory moment about coming across and actually coming onto the roof of the library. Well, we developed the very simple little diagram for this building and had it be very expressive of this idea of the arc of the bridge. And again, it was a very simple move, but opening up to the views of the Catalinas off in the background and developing this simple little bridged arc form that drove the architecture of the building. So here we were really had a very modest budget, but the idea of creating these indoor-outdoor moments. This is actually a smaller courtyard that functions for the staff and a larger courtyard that allows folks to bring books out into this reading court and the views that happen off to the north here. But very, very simple, earnest, kind of that cowboy aesthetic of dealing with the architecture of the space. So this is about this is about 2000, right around 2000. Which was one of our earliest projects in starting our firm. We took that same idea about our work, and we actually got another project, another library project up in Phoenix. And this was a desert room branch library. It sat on about 45-acre site, and the site is actually this big chunk of desert right here. And you could see that our context is sort of this context that nowadays everybody gets to deal with, is the developed housing that happens all around us. But we're on this edge, and our site is actually right in that little edge right there. Well, what happens to us when we build in the Southwest, we come across these little arroyo and these little braided streams. Typically what happens when the developers come in, they'll take that same braided landscape and edit it down into, we'll push the water onto the golf courses, we'll drive it into the little lanes that we create, the little greenways, and channelize and guide all that water into areas on the site. As we were coming in to disturb this wonderful piece of land, we really wanted to be sensitive about, well, how do you build in the desert? How do you do it correctly? We don't want to just come in and blade this side off. So what we came down to was an idea that major roadways along this edge, an idea of really introducing people into the desert before you bring them back into the building. So in this instance, it was this idea of creating a building that had a large shaded roof, and that with the notion that along the edge of the arroyo out in the middle of the desert, what you find is a nurse tree. And a nurse tree is effectively a palo verde or a mesquite that shades a saguaro cactus as it's growing, as it's a seedling. And then ultimately it grows up through the tree, and the tree passes away over time. And the saguaro is nurtured by that environment. So the idea of creating a nurtured environment for learning along this arroyo became the whole idea of this particular building, and the idea of shade. So this little 15,000 square foot library with about a 25,000 square foot roof is nestled along these braided stream that carry through the site. We actually introduced people onto the site, into the desert, and then walk them back through the desert, across the arroyo again to bring them back into the library. So kind of a poor image there. But this is that experience. So we've taken, the bringing you out into the desert and taking you into the landscape over here in the parking area, and then walking you back across this arroyo that runs right down through here, runs to about 3 to 4 feet of water when the rains occur, so that you really get a sense of what happens as the monsoonal season hits. And of course, then we open the building to this beautiful skyline and out to that acreage that gives us those amazing Arizona sunsets. The roof structure then just sits on a series of these pin columns that really represent that idea of tree form. It's kind of that random feel of the columnar structure that lands into the landscape. And then these curvilinear walls that are basically enclosures of the reading courts follow along the arroyo's edge and contain those seating spaces. Again, with that idea of materiality and thinking about how we build in the desert, we really wanted to think about these buildings in the notion of building with almost a found object. Because you can walk around on this site and you can find old tin cans and rusty nails and all those sorts of things. That it had an appropriateness to build on this site that way. So again, using the stacked stone baskets and the weathered steel along the street edge and turning that down to protect ourselves from the noise of the street, but then having this almost sort of cowboy Miesian edge of the roof opening back towards the entry of the building. And then these volumes here contain all the building systems. And moving into the building, you'll see that they're actually suspended with nothing but glass below them. The exterior courtyards are actually cooled by our relief air out of the building, so that we're actually tempering these outdoor environments so people can go outside in the heat of summer. You could see, so that by doing that, it kept all these ceilings clean, and we could bounce natural light and our artificial light off those surfaces. So a real playful approach to a singular volume of space, and this is the little meeting room space that occurs under one of those masses. But an idea of developing a building that really is sort of a found object in the landscape. And of course, as we created these apertures, and invited the daylight, invited the desert sky into the building, as the sun moves around the building, it's another important element in our environment. That's what happens when the desert is painted by the sky. And these really powerful moments that occur every single day as the sun goes through its cycle and changes the color and the effect on the insides of these buildings. We then were another library that this happens to be in North Scottsdale. And the interesting thing about this project was we were actually given a site. We were really excited about it. There's an existing library that sits right here that's part of a middle school. They originally asked us to build an expansion right here, but because there were so many issues with, locating a public building with people coming and going through the middle school, we ultimately came down to say that it was much better to separate it and build the building here on this corner. Now, of course, what that did for us is we have buses and parents dropping off their children. This is the bus lane. We have a mini mart up here on the corner. We have all these houses, the athletic center and a skate park. So what was this sort of pristine idea of an undisturbed desert site really wasn't true. What we had was a site that was completely surrounded by activity and noise and distraction. So how do you, unlike those other projects that had the ability to look out into the landscape and look out into the view and the sky and the horizon, we didn't have that opportunity here. And we find this on a lot of projects, even if you were doing a project internal to, say, in downtown. How do you react to the fact that you now have this compromised site? So in this instance, we looked at how you can go back and talk about natural sequences that allow you to borrow from these natural sequences that you can import into these ideas into this project in a powerful way. And really what it became all about was the idea of coming into this building into a series of slot canyons that bring you up into this building and have this internalized sense of or sequence into the building. So this is this thrusted form. It's all sheathed in plate steel. It's a building really without any windows. We actually took the rock off the site and put it back on the roof of the building when we were done with it. The building's actually designed for a grass roof, for a native grass roof to replicate what's occurring here, and a series of roof gardens that occur, deeper roof gardens that will allow trees and landscape to grow in these wells. But a building that's all about the geology of the desert, sort of just thrust up through the ground and placed in contrast to the McDowell Mountains in the background. As we move into the building, this is coming into the entry of the building, and again, it's really that idea of a building that is more of the landscape. And coming up to the front of the building, you're invited along this path and introduced between these large planes of steel. And it's very much, if you've been to Antelope Canyon up around Page, the idea of coming up to the canyon wall and finding your way into this little crevasse that ultimately takes you back into these amazing canyon spaces. So finding your way back in, being guided by these walls that anywhere from 18, 24 feet high that lean in on you to give you that feeling of compression. Everything's rendered in steel to have that homogeneity of stone that you get in the natural canyon. There's a trickle of water that leads you in along one edge, just as if you were moving through the natural canyon edges. As you move in here, you're basically removed from the context of the traffic, of the noise, of the mini-mart, of the school buses, and introduced into a much more serene kind of environment. So selectively using these metaphors to edit out the context that we're struggling with. And again, this doesn't show a very dramatic sky, but the sky paints this building continuously as the sky changes. But again, the natural kind of idea, and then our synthetic environment, really, which is the synthetic canyon here. But you're brought into this very minimalist courtyard that's used for activities by the library, and then ultimately guided inside. So these are the areas where we have the ability to put. We never got it because, oddly enough, we had facilities folks that were all worried about how to get a lawnmower on the roof. So we don't have to face that so much anymore. Green roofs are becoming much more common, and they're actually thinking now about going back and putting landscape up. But the idea being here that as you go down into the canyon, the natural canyon example, the ground plane is lifted, so seeing landscape up in these volumes was the original concept. But you're invited into the building. The entire interior of the building is sheathed in a pegboard that is acoustical, bringing you around and having one singular view back up to the mountains in the background. And throughout all of this, underneath these floors are state-of-the-art mechanical and electrical systems that allow these buildings to change dramatically over time. You know, we create these high volumes. This is actually a LEED, a sustainable design building. But by air conditioning things from the floor, it means we only have to air condition to about that height, and we let things get warm as we go up. It's the way buildings were built in the desert for years and years and years before we invented lay-in ceilings. So allowing the cool air down low and this pillow of warmer air above as a insulation creates a very energy efficient building. Story time room, the idea of the crevasses above your head. And it's really a building with, you know, these are internal views into our courtyards adjacent to us that, again, have daylight invited into the building, but cut out the view of the adjacent roadways. Right about this same time period, we had a little project that was for an inner city library. And this was for a really impoverished area in the middle of Phoenix. The Section 8 housing, which anybody's familiar, is very, very low income, assisted living. In the middle of this town, you could see, and this is just a smattering of it, but this is part of it. And if you really look at this, it goes on for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks. Well, the site is here. There's a little school right here. And when school got out, every single child walked down this road through the gate and went to the existing library, which is here. And it was their home away from home. So we had an interesting challenge for us, is that this building was full of asbestos and a lot of nasty little things, that it had to be torn down. And we had to build a new building here. But this was very revered by the community. And looking at how we could work with the community, they actually built this garden in one of the courtyards of the existing building. How did we build a new facility and still have that same sense of community here? So in getting together with the community and working with the kids and the adults, the idea of creating this singular space that allows for the children to have their areas both inside and out, the young adults to have theirs, the adults to have theirs, and allow for everything from little children to be basically unattended all the way to our homeless population in the same space. But within this overall volume here allowed us to unify our community in this singular bar. And really the idea came down to being this idea of kaleidoscope, of bringing all these different elements together. So in the central area, we actually pulled the art from the existing building and feature it here in a series of stained glass lenses that occur down through the middle. And then we introduced these strikes of natural daylight that occur all the way through the building. And just created a space that has become, again, a very important element in the community. And I think the thing that's been exciting about this is that we thought that we were going to be seen as taking away an important thing, but this has been very well received, and the community is actually, you know, inner city we were worried about it getting damaged and graffitied, and none of that has happened. And it still is the place where parents know their children can be safe. The same type of a program we had up at on the way to Lake Pleasant up in Phoenix, and this is a library that occurs on the roadway, Lake Pleasant Parkway, on the way out to the lake. And the idea of we had a community that effectively they came out and they bladed every square inch of desert for about 15 square miles, just bladed it flat, took it all away. We had the topography of the original, and we started studying how we could integrate a building into that topography. And when we came out to the site, all we found was dirt and little orange flags, because it had all been just scraped clean. And that's the way that they go about building these subdivisions. So we had a different chore, and that's how do you come back and develop a building that has any kind of meaning after its context has been erased. So the idea of beginning to integrate the notion of the significance of the area with the raised roof forms, dealing with very simple materials. This is a tilt slab concrete walls that we patterned just by sort of mashing the screed into it in order to get the textures almost like stone. And then these lifted roof forms that allow natural daylight deep into the building. And basically opening up and tearing these walls apart so that they basically cantilever from the ground and allow for daylight to be introduced all the way around the volume and really open this up in a very ethereal kind of way. So the children's areas here, some seating areas for the adult areas, but the whole idea of introducing natural daylight and openness into these spaces that otherwise would be closed down by these exterior wall forms. On the ends of the diagram then, as in all of the buildings we try to do, it's how do you begin to engage indoor and outdoor space. So here we had, a grass court for the children to go out and enjoy the outdoors. And ultimately there'll be a park developed next to it, so there'll be a nice connection across. We've taken this same process, or the same kind of looking at our work on the road, and we've got a number of different places with it. One of the projects that we've recently completed is the Oklahoma City Library. This is about 4 years old now. And we went to Oklahoma, which was kind of interesting because it's somewhat of a desert. It's a large prairie grass, expansive horizons. And one of the things we really came away with is this was really the iconography of Oklahoma. And every time we went and asked them about what was significant about Oklahoma, we said, well, what about the Indians? And they'd bring up, well, the Trail of Tears, it's not too cool. We don't really want to talk about that. What about the, coming north or coming into the west? And they said, well, the Sooners, that wasn't too cool either. We don't want to talk about that. And we really came down to, well, what's significant about, Oklahoma or its people? And they said, well, we're all nice people. And I was like, well, that's kind of hard to get my head around from an architect's perspective, because we hope all our clients are kind of nice. But one of the things we found was that there was this agricultural kind of environment of the grasses. There was the Native Americans that figured out how to protect themselves against the tornadoes pretty early in life. And then there was this amazing cacophony of agricultural elements that occurred on this amazing horizon. So in looking at this project, we looked at this, in what's transpired from the agriculture into the oil industry. And one of the most interesting notions is this is the state capitol building. That, for the longest time, was an active oil derrick in the front yard of the state capitol. And that really said something to us. And so we started looking at, well, what was significant about it? And what we came up with was, again, the idea of a bermed form that protected this library, because it actually was a tornado shelter. So when we have tornadoes come, it's a safe place to go. A large roof form that becomes a grassed plain that then oil derricks are created as light shafts to introduce natural light down into the building all the way through. So this idea of the oil derrick supporting the roof form really began to be how we introduce natural light and how we support the roof. And then, again, the same ideas of using our subfloor for mechanical ventilation. So this project is finished, and I believe I just messed up and didn't include a picture. I have model shots, but no picture. Apologize about that. But we also borrowed away from all of, it happened to be along Route 66, so also looking back towards the idea of how do you look at what's happened in more contemporary times. So the idea of introducing all of these as our iconography for all our book drops and all of our different signage throughout the building. The same idea continues to the use and the response to up at Prescott Valley. We basically built a new library and community college building at the foot of this caldera, which is a 13,000-year-old volcano. We went to the community and said, what's special about Prescott Valley? And again, the only thing everybody would say is, well, do you know we're at the foot of a 13,000-year-old volcano? they must have teach them that in school because everybody said it. And so as we went up and hiked the caldera and looked at what that environment was like, so that caldera actually occurs right along this axis, right up to the mountains, to that mountain. And so this is the library wrapped around, you know, symbolically the mountain wrapping around the font of the volcano here in the center. At night, it's brightly lit. It's made of perforated steel, but wrapped by the hillside. And this liner of wood all the way around the interior. We took up at the top of that central tower. At the bottom is the city hall meeting spaces, and at the top of it are these meeting spaces stacked on top that you can have these views out to the mountains beyond, all the way around 360 degrees. And then you'll see we actually had designed a series of light fixtures that are mirrored surfaces to reflect light, because this is actually one of the sites of the heliograph stations that occurred all the way across the desert Southwest, where they could send signals from mountaintop to mountaintop to mountain peak all the way across, deep into Texas, all the way to Prescott, which was the end of the line in terms of the communication string. So one of our earliest communication devices, digital communication devices, we reflected in the design of the light fixtures here. Even the meeting spaces are conceived as campsites around the centralized meeting areas, and we actually put fireplaces throughout so that there was still that continuity on the cold days, continuity with the idea of getting around a warm fire. One project that and am I going through these too quickly? I know I tend to go pretty quick. One project we just recently finished, and this one has been really interesting, is South Mountain Community Library. And this is a mixture of a library that we worked with a community college along with the City of Phoenix library system, and the two of them came together in one building. And as you look at, this is the site. This is South Mountain. This is the foot of the mountain here. These are ancient irrigation canals that are still used today along the edge of the mountain in the fields. And this is about 1930. And as we go through, you could see that ultimately what happens is we begin to get the intervention of housing that slowly but surely takes away the greenhouses and the poppies and the agriculture from the area, until ultimately what we're really looking at is pretty much all the agriculture is gone. But it really was a really important piece of the community, and also the remembrance of the agriculture that occurred for the community colleges here, and the idea that the college itself is able to lift people out of the agricultural background and give them a future. So as we looked at this project, this was a really interesting study to say, well, where did we come from on this site, and ultimately where are we going? So a lot of the material that was grown, the asters and the citrus and cotton fields and sorghum, were all the things that made the area as rich as it was. It really began to get me interested in this idea of patterning. And I mean, when you fly across the country, you see these patterns, and they're everywhere, and it's kind of interesting, kind of the circular patterning here, and then the rectilinear one, and the almost fractal nature that you get into in some other areas of the country that have more to deal with topography. But also then the idea of a library, and the fact that things are becoming more media-based, things are becoming more digitally based. The idea of digital patterning and circuiting, the DNA, and of course the barcode readers. And then interesting parallels to this notion of the integrated circuit, and the fact that an integrated circuit deals with these inputs along all of its edges, and then deals with, in the layers of the integrated circuit, actually connection and isolation in the circuit. And that whole idea became an idea of working with this notion of both insulation and connection inside of the building. So what we developed here was, in the community college, you can barely see here, but we had an entry from the community side, from the public, and then an entry from the community college side. And the idea that it reaches out into the landscape and has these connections into the community. Also, the notion of, I'm just going to zip through these. So the two floors of the building then, just like an integrated chip, having these points where you can connect and they have a relationship between the two, but other areas where they become more solid and they insulate themselves from one another. So creating these virtual connections, or literal connections in this case, or insulating them from one another, and then reflecting that in ultimately what the building was to be. So here, it's the idea of, you know, the vertical striations on the outside of the building, that barcode reading as surface all the way around. The idea of introducing natural daylight with the amplitude of these clear stories on the roof that bring the light deep down into the building. And the idea that we're just pulling and pushing on a very simple volume to begin to create opportunities for openings and shade and significant moments of view and connectivity out of the building. So it's a building that allows, it becomes very ethereal and open right through the skin to much more solidity in other areas. This is one of the primary axes from the school. And then the idea of the patterning comes into play with the stratification of the different layers. You can see we used a laser cut aluminum patterning here of the flower pattern. The asters and the sorghum are all rendered in both the laser cut aluminum, as well as then the patterning on the glass, the etching on all the glass throughout the building. And the connection to the daylight that's brought daylight deep down into the building. And then where you have these vertical connections, there's a connection, a functional connection between the community college function and the public function below. So we allow for these connections and then these isolations throughout. And then the service trays that you see that run throughout the building are actually where all the mechanical and electrical systems run, so that we can unify them all, and they're actually the source of light throughout. So even within the diagram, we have a circuit board running all of the utilities throughout. You can see those here. And then that extends to the exterior, where we've created courtyard spaces. This is the children's courtyard. Again, we put in a little citrus grove here, and the ability for them to come in during story time and actually plant plants and seeds in these raised benches in order to experience the whole idea of agriculture. The story time wall. And then the notion of pattern, even down to how the wood is organized throughout the building. So our work falls into a number of different places. This is at the foot of the Superstition Mountains, where we've created just a very landform, roof form that, again, is an idea that responds back to, well, how do you build the foot of a mountain and have a very powerful kind of architecture that responds to its particular sense of context and its particular relationship to the mountains beyond. So the idea of the roof as its own mountain range, stepping over, we're actually bridging over another arroyo here, where seating areas are along the arroyo's edge. The library is in this area, and this bridge actually connects us to a number of other academic spaces on the building. The topography of the roof then is experienced not only from the outside, but also the inside, and the extensive folding of the roof forms, and the topography of the floors moving adds some real drama to the spaces as well. I threw two other projects in here, and this one is a project that we just recently finished, and they're not libraries. This is the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research down at the University of Arizona. We literally are finishing this one as we speak. But this is the world-class institution, the leaders of dendrochronology, which is the science of tree rings. And their building was a project that they actually gave us this little postage stamp site right here. And as we looked at the site, one of the things we found was the only way for us to get the ideal relationship of their laboratory functions to their offices, to their research laboratories, was to actually set our new building on half on top of an existing building. So to do that, we created this. They have a museum. We used an existing building to house their archives for all their collections, and their museum is in this tree ring core of an exhibit area here that slides against the existing building, stacking vertically over 35 feet tall. Ultimately, then the laboratory spaces stack on top of that. And the building then is very, very economical, going back to that original idea of that cowboy simplicity. Very simple building, but it's sheathed in hanging rods all the way around the outside that move in the wind. So these are kinetic. So as the wind blows, much like being in a tree, the facade undulates. So the lateral bracing, going back and focusing on how does a tree grow and stabilize itself, this is actually the lateral bracing for the building that comes up through in tree form behind the scrim. This is actually the building then. I don't actually have finished photographs because we're just finishing it as we speak, but this is the undulating scrim with the lateral bracing system that occurs behind. And it's a very dramatic, just a subtle wind moves these in and out, and they're designed to withstand the terrific winds that we get in the monsoonal season, but still have this wonderful undulation that occurs and makes it a very dramatic building. And lastly, one project that we are currently working on, we're just getting ready to start construction on it, is an environmental and natural resources building. And this project really focuses on, much like the Arabian library example I showed you a little earlier, where we have a site that this is a major roadway. We have roadway to the other edge. We have a parking structure to this edge, and we have an existing building to that edge. And we're supposed to put an environmental building on that site. There's not much environmental about a parking lot. So what we came back to was the idea of looking at these buildings in a way that creating, again, a more naturalized context internal to the building and developing a series of flanking research spaces around a centralized courtyard that stacked a series of garden spaces and these little pavilion areas out in the landscape, and actually take a lot of what we would normally have as air-conditioned space, move it outside in tempered areas where we were using natural processes to cool these areas. So that naturalized form, this is the southern facade, is scrimmed by the series of metal staves. As you go into the interior of the building, this is a shot down in the interior core, we're collecting all the rainwater. They're terrace gardens. Every one of these is a planted garden on every level. And we're actually misting on each floor. What you see in the background here is a solar chimney. So we're allowing the buoyancy of the cool, moist air to drop and cool the space down. And then it's drawn through an underground cistern and intakes over to the solar chimney and exhausted out the ends of the building. We're collecting the condensate water from a series of laboratory buildings around us for about 600,000 gallons of water that's currently being flushed down the drains. We're collecting and we're using to mist these systems and provide irrigation for the landscape environment here. And therefore, we're taking a lot of what normally would have been interior air-conditioned space and moving it now into the exterior space. So trying to bring back kind of this naturalized approach to how we used to live in the desert and reduce our dependency on air conditioning. And do it in a powerful and a integrated way. And here's a shot showing the cisterns and the landscape edges and the solar chimneys. So we're particularly proud of this one. This one's just getting started on construction.
Where is it?
This is at the University of Arizona. Oops. So that's kind of what I brought to show you today. Hopefully that was... Any questions or? Thank you.
There seemed to be a natural progression with a lot of the work. I don't know if it was a timeline that was connected to it, or were the budgets growing, or whatnot. But they seem to be getting bigger and more complicated and whatnot. So I don't know, is it a timeline thing or a budget thing?
Well, this was really chronological. So this is really taking you kind of from our very early beginnings to kind of where we're at today. And yeah, they do get bigger. They do get bigger. Although, and I had a long conversation with Eric, I'd love to get smaller. And kind of, sometimes when these projects get so big, you kind of like to go back and think about things on a much more intimate scale. But it's been an interesting ride so far.
Were the libraries a specific building type that you were working on, or just you got one project and they just kind of...
You know, you're sort of a product of you are what you eat to some degree, and I had a great deal of experience when I was with some larger firms doing libraries and research buildings. Surprise. It's just been, one thing that's been interesting about libraries is they've continued to adapt, they change, they're becoming something else. You know, for a long time we've been getting rid of all the books in the libraries and putting in more computers. More computers, less books. Who needs books? Who needs books? There's no bookstores anymore. Who's got books? Guess what? It's the library. Let's put all the books back in the library because it's the only place we can get them. So, you know, we've kind of ridden these curves, and it's been interesting to see them continue to reinvent themselves and be along with the ride and have a nice connection to the community. There aren't too many public buildings left. You know, we turn city halls into service centers, and we turn, you know, court buildings into these lockdown law or security facilities you can't even go in anymore. So it's one of the few bastions of community life that I think we still have.
I have a question. Like for your tree ring research building and the facade, did that produce sound?
It can, and that was actually a problem because we didn't want it to. I mean, because literally, you think about it, we hung a wind chime around a building. So the way it was designed is that there's a fixed arm at the top. The strands hang. There's a section of tube, a chain, a section of tube, a chain, just like you would build a wind chime. But at the bottom, they're fixed to another arm. And the difficulty we had is that if you can imagine the wind coming along and blowing on that, well, what happens in the structural world is it puts a big tension on it, and if you have that much force on a building, you can actually cause damage. You can tear those things right off. So the way it's designed is it actually deflects, and as it deflects in a catenary, it actually lifts the bottom arm, which is gravity weighted, and it's lifted up. So it provides the tension on the arm, and when the wind lets go, it comes right back down again. So it's always held in tension to keep them from banging into one another. We were really after the kinetic. We originally designed it with a sustainable wood. It was all done in wood, and when it was in wood, we let it clank. We wanted to have kind of the rattling of the branches, but it's in aluminum, and that would not be so much fun. But
Your use of woods outside, what do you use?
Western red cedar. It's actually a really durable material. We try to be careful where we do it. It's mainly in protected areas, but boy, we've had it outside in a lot of situations, and it's worked really well for us.
Do you do any post-occupancy evaluation?
We do, and so we go back and visit our buildings. We actually are invited back on a number of our buildings to come back and do renovations or changes, and the libraries change things all the time. They'll move desks and things around, and so we come back and you see what doesn't work, and it's always interesting. There's a lot with the types of projects we do. There's a lot of hope that the architecture, the design of the buildings can make changes to organizations. You know, libraries want to do things differently. They want to be more service-oriented and less sitting behind a desk and being the old library where you walk up to the counter and talk to the librarian. And so we design these buildings that sort of break down those old typologies, but people are people, and they're used to doing things in certain ways. So oftentimes we can design a library with no desks. And we walk back in a year later, and by golly, what's in the middle? Well, a handmade, desk. Somebody cobbled together a couple of cabinets and some file cabinets and put them in the middle of your beautiful floor because they wanted it that way. And that's where we find that we have to come back into those spaces and adjust.
At Desert Room, I took a group of students last fall, and the librarian there just absolutely adored the building. One of her part-time assistants said it was a horrible, horrible building. Because it didn't have those kinds of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that architecture can be a game changer, but really systemic change needs to kind of come within organizations. Otherwise, you end up with those kinds of conflicts.
Do you ever collaborate with any artists, installation artists, or conceptual artists?
All the time. I didn't really show it, but if you saw the Arabian Library, when you walked up, when I was showing the entry into it, there was this really beautiful patterning on the wall, laser cut out of steel. And that was a product of an artist out of Seattle, and that was actually a cutaway of a prickly pear pad. Say that 3 times fast. That was cut in laser and layered against the wall. So just about every public project we do has some element of public art in it. Sculpture. At the Harmon branch, we actually went and worked with a landscape, environmental artist, and redid the community gardens in the site where we removed the old building. We created new community gardens, and so it really varies all over the place.
That building, I was curious, you had talked about that large space, and you talked about designing for the homeless at the end. I'm curious about that because I think I read at the Seattle Library they considered the homeless in that project as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's, one of the, again, going back to the notion of a library as a public building and sort of the last bastion of equal opportunity and equal access to information. I mean, it's a huge issue where if I'm homeless, I don't know if anybody's done it. I went on a trip and I left my cell phone at home and I had no communication. And I had to call somebody, and I actually ran around and tried to use a payphone. Payphones don't work anymore. I mean, literally, you can't find them. So if you think about that little experience, and then you compound that with the idea of I don't have a computer, I don't have no way that I can interact with community, that's why you have to treat the homeless population with the exact same dignity that you do you're paying, tax-paying community. And so the idea of creating spaces for them where they can enjoy the same sort of benefits, but not take advantage of it. Obviously, you don't want them, sleeping and camping out in the building. So it really had a lot to do with oversight, making sure that people could be seen, and also stratifying the space so that there were natural places where children belonged and natural places where adults belonged, and more or less creating ends of the building that allowed each one to happen without ever having to force a cross circulation between the two.
The exterior aged metal on some of the buildings, was that Core 10?
We've used both, Core 10 and which is the weathering steel, and we've also used just natural metal. We found that just the regular carbon steel, it's the desert Southwest. Unless it's in contact with soil, it lasts forever. Sometimes it's we oftentimes go in and specify Core 10 and say you can use carbon steel if the municipality allows you. And when they see the number, normally they allow you.
That was my question.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Are you planning on coming to Vegas and giving us a library?
You know, we tried. We tried once. We actually chased a library up here, but you do have some really good firms up here. And it is one of those things where we'd also like to work with some really good firms up here, because we do a lot of library planning and things like that. And some of the things that we see, you know, it's good to see a community build of their own. And we tried to participate and help, but there's serious competition for those projects up here. But yeah. So I do think, you know, on that topic, and maybe to close, I think that there's some, when I see these kinds of things happening in cities like this particular event, it's really encouraging, and it's really an exciting kind of a moment, and to see the community engaged and excited about I mean, I've done these kinds of lectures in New York and Chicago, and you know, it's an important part of the community. And to see a lot of the things, Eric took me to lunch today and saw a lot of the more community-based things that are occurring here. It's really exciting. I hope it continues to build, and it's really going to be I think you're at a really interesting point now with the economy kind of getting ready to do what it's doing, and to see if there's the chance that you know, you can also do something in contrast to what occurs down on the Strip, obviously. But I think it's an interesting time for you all.
What's the economy like down in Phoenix?
Our houses are getting almost back up to what we owe on them, which is exciting. You know, there's a vitality in Phoenix. Things are coming back, and it's been being a business owner and sort of watching the cycle of things that are occurring. There's such a parallel between Phoenix and Las Vegas. I mean, we're always on, the both of us are always on the CNN's worst list of how badly we all got hit in the economy. And but the similarity of how things are coming back, it seems very similar. I don't think we got hit quite as hard. We bounced back just a little bit quicker because we're not so dependent on the entertainment industry. We're a little bit more diverse there, but it's been tough. I mean, it's been a tough couple of years for everybody. But I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and so far it's not a train.
You touched a little bit about the comparisons of Las Vegas and Phoenix, and especially the growth of the 80s. And Las Vegas has had that sort of, when you have the 80s, you can think of the 90s, 2000, we get this wall, but there's that learning of design and the importance of it, you know, community, and all of that. You know, I think Phoenix learned that 20 years ago, and I'm hoping Las Vegas is starting to learn that. So maybe touch on that a little bit more.
Well, I think that it was a little bit, maybe I wasn't very articulate about it when I first mentioned it, but I mean, I know people look at, and we had a big discussion with the students earlier in the day, and there was a big discussion about, there seems to be this idea of the Arizona school, and there was even some architecture magazines that had kind of featured this idea of the Arizona school. Like we all got together and went out and designed all these buildings together, and we all got together, and it was a cool little club, and that's how we did our work. That wasn't the case. The things that drove change and the things that set example of amazing little buildings that occurred in Arizona really were driven by individuals. And there were individuals out there doing a really beautiful little building over here and a really great house over here and an amazing little, and I think they began to really culminate when Will Bruder unleashed the main library there. And it really had a substantial impact on architecture in Phoenix. But prior to that, boy, it was a wasteland. I mean, you walked into the town and you wanted to buy a nice house, you had like 3 options. You know, you bought an old historical house, you built your own, or you found, you know, a mid-50s modernist thing, and you got lucky if you could find one of those. And I think that the thing and the interesting parallel to what's going on here in Vegas is, for the longest time in Arizona, you would really have to struggle with your clients to say, I would really like to put rusty metal on the outside of your building, and I think it would look really good, trust me. And I think one of the interesting things that you have going for you here is, like it or not, engage it or not, love it or not, you do have the absolute extreme examples of architecture down on the Strip, okay? And I'm not saying that that's what you want to be, but there by example, and quite frankly, when you go over there and you walk through a lot of the interiors, there's some amazing work that has been done on the interiors on a lot of the projects down on the Strip. And I think by example, you can borrow not the philosophy or the concept or anything else, but you can use as a form of reference. It brings the rungs up a bit. It gives you a leg up on dealing with clients in terms of bringing them along on your kind of your design journey, because by example you have that here. So the question is now, how do you take sort of those influences, and then the Vegas that I was familiar with when I came here back in the early 80s, which had kind of a nitty-gritty, you know, a grittiness to it, but it had a real honesty about what it was, and along with your community now, and how do you integrate those things, and what I'm seeing out here in the development of really strong indigenous architecture from the community. And that's, I think, a really exciting moment. And that's where I see, you know, it's easy for me from an outsider to come in and see that, I think. And it's been so tough for a lot of people that you get so beat down with what the economy's been doing, and everybody's just scraping to get by, that sometimes it's maybe harder to see the horizon. But I think there's some really amazing things going on here. And the chemistry is all coming together, and I really think it's only going to be a matter of time where, you know, Vegas will do everything and exceed. I think it has the opportunity to exceed what's happened in Phoenix or Arizona. So, with that, thank you.
Okay, if you were maybe a little shy to ask a question, Jim will be around at the bar. So feel free to go over there and ask there. I'm sure we'll have great conversations. I also get very intimidated by this amazing crowd that's out here, and I get goosebumps thinking about how many people came out to this event. So I forget to introduce myself. So this is a common theme here. So I'm Amy Fincham, and this event is being hosted by Colab Las Vegas. And if it's your first time at Colab, we're a nonprofit. We're about to have our 1-year anniversary on April 5th. That's when we had our grand opening at Facilitech. And we have a little gallery space over in the Arts District at Art Square. And if you haven't been there, please visit us over there. Right now we're exhibiting the work of our 7 lectures that are part of this series. So it's some amazing work. And also, there is a sign-in sheet going around, and if you didn't get a chance to sign it, you came in late or something, please sign it, because we use those questions of if you're in the profession and those kind of things to evaluate And then we use that data for going after grants, because a lot of them require that you document and how are you evaluating who your audience and those kind of things. So please come sign that out and go drink. Again, if you came in late, our next lecture is in 2 weeks, so we're giving a week off. And it's not at this space. Again, it's not at this space. It's going to be over at the World Market Center. So have a good evening, and thank you guys so much for coming. Okay, sorry about that, you guys. We are ready to get started. We'd like to thank Jim Richard for being here today. He's an amazing designer, and we're really lucky to have him with us. Before we get started, I'd like Amanda Harris to come talk about her show here real quick.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, good to see everyone. So I see many familiar faces, so I see a lot of people who have been in the gallery for this show, and some of you it's your first time, but this is actually the last week of this show. It's Neoteric Deconstruction by Angie Morelli, and what we've done for the first time ever is for the first week of the show, we're doing the available pieces on silent auction. So there, I just put them up today, and there's bid sheets around the room. The bidding starts at $150. And we've also decided for this wall over here, the pieces that are available are all $50 or $100. And we would just like her work to be accessible and to find good homes. So please stay around afterwards and check it out. And I'll be here if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for allowing us to use your space for these lecture series. You guys have been very generous to us. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this entire lecture series. I saw Mark Abelman here with InStyle. Thank you, Mark. Chris I say it wrong every time. Adanasio. Are you here tonight? Chris okay. Thank you, Chris. How Crow Yules also donated. Is there anybody here tonight from there? If you're here and we call your name, if you could just raise your hand so we can acknowledge you, that'd be great. Doug Walton with Doug Walton Architects. TJK, JMA Architecture Studios, Sage Design, I see Jonathan in the back there, Audio Visual Warehouse, Innovative Consulting, the 2012 Young Guns, I know Drew's here tonight, Clemente, Aaron, Vince, Garrett Sullivan, Leon, Anthony, Forte Specialties, Superlight, Wright Engineers, Baker Drotter Associates, Assemblage Studio, Pugsley Simpson Coulter, Mendenhall Smiths, and the City of Las Vegas. Do we have any representatives from the city here tonight? Okay, thank you guys for sponsoring this lecture series, and also Eric Strain for helping to put this lecture series together. I'd also like to thank Laura and Enrique with Radioactive Productions for their time in videotaping these lecture series and our panel discussion that allows these to be available for people that couldn't make it here tonight. I just want to remind you guys that our next lecture is not at this space. It's 2 weeks from now on April 1st, and it's the only lecture that won't be here from now on. And that's going to be at the World Market Center, so don't come here, because you'll be alone. But you could go next door and drink still. So, and also, you know, stick around afterwards and continue the dialogue next door.